Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I have some excellent fantasy romance books for you that I believe are underhyped, underrated, less popular. So all of the books that, excuse me sir, I put his phone up there because he was being real loud with it. And now he's probably just going to stare at it the whole time. Anyways, the books on this list are books, some of them are newer, some of them are older, but I feel like a lot of them are flying under the radar of a lot of fantasy romance readers. All of them in here have less than 8,000 ratings, and there are only 2 that have 8,000. The rest of them have 5,000 or less. Some have 1,000, some have a couple hundred. So these are books you may have heard before, but they are certainly not hyped as much as I feel like they should be, and they're just really solid and great fantasy romances. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so the first book that I want to recommend is actually an author that overall I would recommend. I really love this author, and I don't see her talked about nearly enough, and that is Bec McMasters. So this is her high fantasy series. The first one is Promise of Darkness. It's the Dark Court Rising series, and I believe there are 3 books out at this time. So this is a fae fantasy romance, and I just love it so much. It has a very classic Hades and Persephone-esque type of retelling where we have the queen of this fae kingdom. This is a whole world that's ruled by magic, and then we have the Prince of Darkness, essentially. He's not a vampire, he is the Prince of Evernight. And they are in, so the Prince of Evernight and the Queen are in this very tentative treaty where they will not fight and war with one another as long as a treaty is upheld. And that treaty is that one of the Queen's daughters has to come to the prince's home and stay there for the term of 3 months as a political hostage. So, of course, the heroine, the daughter who goes over there, is gonna fall in love with him. And it is fantastic. I have to tell you, I haven't read this book in a few years, but when I read it, I was absolutely enraptured with it. I love this fantasy romance. I think that their relationship is so interesting and unique, and there is a twist at the end that I did not see coming. I love the side characters in here. I think the whole plot, the overarching political intrigue in here is very fascinating. But again, like, I've heard people say that they really love this hero, and I would 100% agree. I was about to compare him to a very popular hero, but I don't want to do that because I don't want to give you any preconceived ideas of what this man is. But this book is so great, and it is so underrated. And this author is, if you like fantasy romance, you have got to read this author, because I've read a few of her books in her other series, and every single one of them I have just felt like this author knows how to write fantasy romance in a way that I really enjoy. So this is a fabulous one, and this is probably my top recommendation because it's not talked about enough, and it deserves to be. Okay, so now this is an author that is not underhyped herself, but this book, I think this book has 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. And in the realm of fantasy romance, like, that is very little, because there are some fantasy romances or romantasies that are so incredibly popular that they have tens of thousands, 50,000, 100,000s, or Fourth Wing has 1 million ratings. So these books deserve some attention, and I think that all of these are solid contenders for Fourth Wing supremacy. But Grace Draven is a fantasy romance author who has been writing for many years, long before Romantasy as a term was coined and long before fantasy romance was so popular, and she is a solid author. A lot of her books are very well hyped and very well loved, and by me, including by me. Entreat Me, her Beauty and the Beast retelling, one of my favorite books of all time. Obviously, I really love her Wraith King series. I think that is fantastic. I just love her books. So this is a series of interconnected standalones. You don't have to read them in order to get the whole story here. So this is book 2 in her series. And I personally prefer this to book 1 because it has a few things that I personally really enjoy. So in the series we have our heroine, who is an earth wielder of magic. In this world, magic is outlawed. So if you are found using magic, you are typically put to death. Now our earth wielding magic user heroine ends up stumbling across this artifact that is very magical, and she believes it to be the bone of a draga, which everyone believes to be extant. They're basically dragons. Extinct. Did I say extent? Basically believes them to be extinct. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm stumbling over my words today. So she finds this artifact. She knows it is a draga bone, and she hides it. She doesn't know what to do with it. She knows it is going to be extremely powerful. There is a ruling queen who is on the hunt to find the last draga and kill them and use its body and everything for magical properties. So that is in a different kingdom because magic is outlawed in this kingdom. So our heroine is not sure what to do with this, but she knows if she gets caught with this dragon bone, she is in trouble. So enter our hero, who is actually one of the last remaining draga on Earth, but he hides it because he can shift into a human form. So nobody knows that he's actually a draga, nobody knows that he can use his magic, and he is one of my favorite heroes, and I feel like this is a book that I don't talk about very much. It's truly so good. I love the romance between them. They end up meeting up because he feels called back to that dragon bone. It's something that is going to help him restore his magical powers, and it is something that he desperately, desperately needs. And this had a very strong plot, this had a very strong world, and the romance in here was beautiful as well. I absolutely adored this. I thought it was fantastic. Okay, so now this next book was going around on BookTube a few years ago, and I really enjoyed it. I have book 2. I have never continued with the series. Mood reader problems, I guess, because I was really into fantasy romance when I started the series, and then I feel like I got pulled into historical and dark romance and kind of just never got back to it. So this is Little Fire. This author, I feel like, is super underrated. I really enjoy this book and this story. I think she does a great job of building characters and building romance, along with a fantasy world that is not difficult to get into. So in this book we have Declan, our hero, who is one of the most powerful archmages known to man. He ends up in this battle where he sees our heroine, who has lost her memory. She has amnesia, she doesn't know who she is, and the two of them end up getting sucked into like this different dimension, different area that is covered in snow, and they're stuck there together and they're trying to find their way out of it. So if you like a snowed-in trope and you like fantasy romance, this book is for you, because by far my favorite part is when they were stuck together in the snow trying to work their way out of it. This book was very fun, filled with great chemistry in the romance, and this has a very grumpy, broody hero, which I super duper love, who is soft only for the heroine. You'll see that theme come up in another book and possibly more, because that's something that I really love in romance. So I really enjoyed this. I felt this was a very strong beginning to the series, and I highly recommend it. Okay, this next one is a bit of an urban fantasy, and it's very fun from a very well-beloved author, and nobody has read this book, so I'm going to recommend it to you. So it is The Sinner by Emma Scott. Emma Scott is known for her very, very emotional contemporary romances, and I think she is excellent at that. I think this may have been her fantasy debut, and I thought it was very, very solid. I really enjoyed this book. So we have our heroine, Lucy, who is very shy. She's very introverted. She works for a nonprofit organization in New York, and as soon as she's done, she goes home to her apartment, where she stays there with her pet and reads her beloved romance novels. She is wanting so badly an epic love of her own, but she has kind of given up on it. One day she's out walking back behind her apartment and she comes across a dead body, and she is immediately shook and doesn't quite know what to do with it. But then the kicker really is that it's actually not a dead body, it is alive, and it's also not human because he has these big, black, beautiful angel wings. And then she gets thrown into this world looking for how to help him get back to his home dimension, essentially, while also recognizing that a bigger war is going on with angels and demons and all these other things. And I just love this romance in here so much because it very heavily deals with the concept of soulmates, and I just can never get enough of that. So if you're looking for a soulmate type fantasy romance that's in an urban setting, you have got to pick this up because it is so freaking good. Okay, this next one is super unique and very, very fun, and this is actually a YA fantasy romance. So it is The Night Hunt. In this book we have our heroine, who is a monster who feeds on fear. And she is out for vengeance and revenge for the people who are responsible for killing her family, her mother and father. And through the course of that, she ends up meeting our hero, who is essentially a ferryman who ferries messages and souls from the land of the living to the land of the dead. He has amnesia and does not remember who he was or anything about his mortal life. One day they end up crossing paths and they strike a bargain that says that if she helps him break the curse so that he can find out who he was and regain his mortal memories, he will help her get vengeance on the people that killed her family. In order to do that, they need to track down 3 different monsters. So this is a little bit of a quest adventure type of story, but the romance in here is so beautifully well done, especially because it is a YA book, so it's very slow building and very sweet. But I also just really love this fantasy world. I thought this was a great concept. It was very unique. I haven't really read anything like it, and I think it's definitely worth a try. Okay, this next one is a novella, and it is one of my favorite novellas of all time. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it is Briarley. So this is an MM romance set in World War II. It is a very unique setting, and it starts with our main hero, who is a parson, who finds himself out and about in this war-torn country looking for some refuge, and he finds this house in the country that is one of the only ones that is standing amid all of the rubble, and he enters hoping to find a refuge in there, and he sees that the house is deserted, but the table is set with this extravagant banquet and lots of food. So he ends up resting there for a while, and then as he is going to leave, he sees this garden with some roses, and of course he picks a rose to take home to his daughter. Now that is the thing that unleashes the beast, which is a dragon form, literally, who can shift into a man, and the parson ends up becoming the prisoner or captive. And this book, you guys, this little novella is so beautifully romantic, and it is so beautiful with these two people who really are trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in the world, and they find that together, and it's just absolutely lovely. I've talked about this every single time I mention any novella. I mention this anytime any Beauty and the Beast retelling is mentioned. I mentioned this book because it's so unique, it's so beautifully well told, and it is so subtle, and like the type of subtle awareness that people have when they're starting to fall in love or realize something about themselves that is both like beautiful and painful at the same time. Like, oh, it's just so good and so beautiful. So I know I said beautiful a lot, but that is one that I for sure want to recommend, especially if you like Beauty and the Beast retellings and you're looking for an MM one, which I think is kind of unique and is probably not seen a lot. So that is one I wholeheartedly recommend. Okay, so now this next book is by a beloved author of mine, and it is also a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Honestly, I could have just done Beauty and the Beast retellings, but no, these are underhyped fantasy romances. So this one is Briar and Roses by T. Kingfisher. Now, T. Kingfisher is a very, very accomplished author, and she writes in a variety of genres, typically always having some element of fantasy in there. So this is a fantasy romance that is very sweet, and it has a really beautiful and unique fantasy setup, and the whole setup for the Beauty and the Beast in here is also very unique. This is the type of book that I said in my review that it's like, it has just enough in here that is super relatable and known to us in the Beauty and the Beast retelling, while still making some changes that have you thinking, oh, that's very clever, like what she did with the Beauty and the Beast retelling in here. So this is about Bryony, who is left to take care of her sisters after their merchant father's death. They live in a village that is far outside of the city, and once again there is a snowstorm, and she finds herself stuck out in it, and then she sees this manor house, which she goes into, and that's where she meets the Beast. And now the Beast is a very different type of beast in here. He's not your typical beast. He is a unique character in every sense of the word. So much so that Bryony cannot decide if he is actually a fellow prisoner or if he's her captor. And then, of course, there is the mystery of the roses that are blooming outside of season, and Bryony herself is a gardener, so you have a little bit of gardening stuff happening in here, and this was just very, very fun. I was really surprised at how romantic this is. There have been a couple of T. Kingfisher's books that I've read. I've read a lot of hers that have kind of struck me with how romantic they are. While I don't typically think of her as a hard-hitting romance author, when she writes a fantasy romance, I think she does it really, really well. So I enjoyed the heck out of this. This, again, is another short one. You could definitely get through this in a day, and I think it's well worth your time. And if you've been interested in this author, but you're not particularly interested in anything that is horror, which is something that she also does, like a cozy type of horror, I would highly recommend this one. Okay, this next one is one that is not read enough in this series. The series is incomplete, and we still don't know when book 3 is coming out. These, again, are interconnected standalones where the overarching plot of the political climate and the world is hanging in the balance, but each one is contained in its own story. So this is a friends to lovers romance, and it is A Touch of Stone and Snow by Milla Vane. Milla Vane writes some truly beautiful and epic fantasy romances, and hers tend to lean a little bit into the old school barbarian, almost like a Game of Thrones without like the courts and, you know, almost that type of vibe where it's this barbarian type of landscape, and there's war, and there's this person called the Destroyer who is wreaking havoc and decimating the country, basically. And along with that decimation comes this unleashment of all of these creatures and demons and things like that. So this book follows our heroine, who is a commander in the army, and she is the only survivor in her team of soldiers to escape from this terrible battle. And because of that, she ends up being labeled as a coward. So she's basically wandering the realm on her own, and she is cast out, and she's kind of very much down on her luck. Now, our hero is her childhood friend, and he's actually the one who is responsible for getting her branded as a coward. And they end up teaming up together when a goddess enters them into a bind where they have to work together to get out of it and to safety. I truly enjoyed this book. I thought it had a great pace. I really liked the setup. I think the story was very unique. And this also has a magical snowcat, like a snow leopard type of thing, which is super fun, and I really liked that. And I just really, really loved that they were friends, and then they kind of not necessarily got into hardcore enemy territory, but there is an antagonism there for a while, and then they go into lovers. So I enjoyed this book very much, and I would definitely recommend it for a fantasy romance reader. Okay, now the next book that I have to recommend is a new favorite of mine, and it is Embers in the Snow, which is a vampire fantasy romance. So we don't just have vampires in here, we also have other fantasy creatures, and that's what I really enjoyed about this, is how vampires were introduced. In this book, nobody really knows the word vampire. They just know that this hero, who is the son of this dark lord who everybody basically hates, and he's a tyrant, he is his son, and he also has a reputation of having just darkness around him. He came back from the war changed in a way where he won't even go into the sunlight at all because he basically can't. So he has a lot of mystery surrounding him and darkness and danger. Now our heroine ends up being betrothed, not of her own free will, to what she believes is his father, and then she ends up finding out that it's actually the son, and she's kind of terrified. And their first meeting in here is one of my favorite first meetings I've ever read in a fantasy romance. I loved how much chemistry they had right off the bat. This does tend to lean into insta-love a little bit, but it's not insta-lust, and it feels, even though it was insta, it felt very natural, and I really, truly enjoyed watching these two fall in love so quickly and watching their relationship develop. This does have a background plot with the fantasy world and some political intrigue in here as well, but by far my favorite thing is their romance and the nature of it, because she's human, kind of, and he is a vampire, and how her blood calls to him, and it is the only thing that will really like slake his thirst. I just adored it. The romance is very sweet. It has everything you want in a vampire romance. It feels a little bit like Twilight for grown-ups in the best possible way. By that I mean that he is the type of hero that feels obsessive in the way that Edward was. So if you liked that, I think you will love this because it was super fun. And I also highly recommend the audiobook. The audiobook is narrated perfectly. And that's how I consumed it, and I loved it so much. Okay, now the last book that I have to recommend to you is one that is going around a lot right now, but it does have less than 8,000 ratings. This is one that had 8,000 ratings. This one and Briar and Roses are the highest rated books, number of ratings on Goodreads, so they both have about 8,000 at the time when I'm making this video. So, it is House of Bane and Blood. So this is a very unique setup for a fantasy romance. I feel like most of the time we see high fantasy and typically fae. So this feels like a breath of fresh air if you're kind of tired of fae romances and you want something new and unique. It feels very much like a Gilded Age meets steampunk in here. It's pitched as Peaky Blinders meets Grishaverse, and I think that's a very apt depiction for what we have here. So, post-industrial age, steampunk, we have people who have powers. They're categorized into different types of powers for what they have, and it's just fantastic. So our heroine in here is the heiress to a railroad company, basically, and she's trying to save her family's business, and the way she hopes to do that is by marrying off to someone who can help clear her debts and save them from this trouble. And our hero enters the picture, and he sees that he has an opportunity to make use of her for his own purposes while also being attracted to her and desiring her, and he offers to marry her. It's an offer she can't refuse because it's going to clear all of her debts, and then they enter into an arrangement. So they do give off a little bit, I wouldn't say this is enemies to lovers. He's very grumpy and very cold towards her. They're not enemies, but it's very clearly a marriage of convenience. But at the same time, they are both intrigued with each other, and the best part about this, I think, is the way they're intrigued with each other, because it's not lust-based really at all, although they do admire each other's beauty and they desire each other and things like that. I apologize if I'm in a different spot. My memory card filled up. So, the really big pull and draw for me to this romance is the way that they start to fall in love with each other. Because it's not lust-based, although there is an element of desire, obviously. It's really more seeing each other in situations where they have to sort of dig deep and uncover who they are. So they get to see traits of like courageousness and tenaciousness, and and what they're willing to do for their people or for their family, and how much that adds to an admiration of them and leads to them falling in love in a romantic way. And I truly loved the romance in here. I will say the world building in this isn't the best I've ever read, but I loved the setting, I loved the vibes, and I adored the romance. He is an alpha male, which to me is the best type of hero. That's a hero who can be alpha and take control, but he is soft only for the heroine. It's my favorite type of hero, and that is exactly what he is. I love him so much. I apologize I didn't hold up the book. I love this book so much. It is fantastic, and yeah, if you're looking for that type of hero in a very unique type of fantasy setting, I would highly recommend it. Alright, my friends, there you have it. Those are my underrated fantasy romance book recommendations for you. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please let me know what your favorite underhyped fantasy romance is. I would love to know. And if you've made it this far, please leave me any type of star or moon emoji because it's fantasy, and I'll see y'all in my next video.